This is the era of the struggle of good and evil, the era of the battle of people and ferocious beasts. Everyone wants to enter the University of Martial Arts and become the strongest person defending the world. And Su-Li has always been a candidate for the role of this strongest person. The young man was popular with girls who knew him as the number one of their class. They boasted of his appearance. Su-Li didn't even expect that before the high school entrance exams he would encounter unforeseen incidents. The black-haired youth was perfecting Qi. Here he has overcome the 10th level. Here is the 90th. He has already overcome the 1000th level and then passed the 9999th level. Su-Li didn't understand why he had already passed 10,000 levels of Qi cultivation, but still couldn't lay the foundation. The Qi purification, as shown by his bracelet, had reached 9,999 levels and exceeded the limits of the control dimension. Out of the entire school, he was the only one left in the process of Qi purification. A girl who tracked the young man's indicators said that the main classes are mostly already at the stage of forming the foundation. Once considered the strongest, it can become garbage for society overnight. Once defeated by Su-Li, people laughed at him and said that no one could imagine that their number one before the entrance exams would become garbage. Su-Li heard remarks from everywhere that he was still at the stage of Qi purification. Some doubted that there was any benefit to them in being at the stage of laying the foundation. However, the arrival of evil forces always takes you by surprise. People have a new danger. The school where Su-Li studied received information that there are suspicions that followers of the Order of Ermengan are operating in their city. Ermengan is a sea serpent from Scandinavian mythology. The third son of Loki and the giant Angrboda Code Red was announced. Everyone should prepare for the first level of danger. An unknown danger was approaching here. A woman was undergoing medical care treatment, lying in a small crater. She and the medics were surrounded by school students. It is said that the lower creatures will never be able to overcome the higher ones. And this is the rule of the world. But Su-Li doesn't believe it. He fights with people, creatures. It was because he had gone through 10,000 levels of Qi cultivation. Chapter 1, Wuji City, Kaiyuan High School, Recreation Room 025. A blue glow could be seen from behind the doors of the room. The young man in the room was doing push-ups, and a blue aura was flowing from his hands. The young man counted to 100 push-ups and then got to his feet. He had a toned body, black hair and the same color eyes. He said out loud that on the day he would finish the exercises with push-ups that he had done earlier. The young man decided to try something again. Hoping that something would change, a blue-colored aura began to form on his arm. The bracelet on his arm announced that the cultivation of Qi had been discovered by student Su-Li, that youth statistics management has begun. From the bracelet came the calculation of the levels of Qi improvement here. The 10th level was overcome, then the 90th, then the 1000th, at which Su-Li was already tense. But nevertheless, the bracelet continued counting and reached the number of 9,999 levels. The bracelet announced that this number is the limit of the control measurement of Qi purification levels. After that, one by one, error notifications began to appear. A whirlwind rose around Su-Li, and a blue aura enveloped her hand. The young man exclaimed that it was happening again. Namely, there was an explosion. Su-Li's outer clothes were torn to shreds. He covered his eyes with one hand, closing them and put the other on his hips. He said out loud that there had been an explosion again. Su-Li peeked at his palm, which contained a broken electronic bracelet sparkling with lightning. The young man noted aloud that unless after the 10th level, it is possible to continue laying the foundation. But he was already at the 9,999th level. For him, the question was whether the bracelet was a marriage or a fake. But then someone called Su-Li by name, while shouting that, for what reason the young man was practicing in the room, and also clarified about the explosion. After that, a demand was made from this person to open the door as Su-Li's time for privacy was over. Su-Li agreed, addressing the men as the headman, Lu Xing. After that, he went to the door and opened it. Behind this door stood a girl in a school uniform resembling a sailor. She had long brown hair gathered in two low ponytails, and her eyes were brown in her hands. The girl who was Lu Xing was holding a tablet and a pen. Lu Xing began to scold Su-Li, saying that many times other students complained to the teacher about him. She asked the young man if he knew how many she had stood up to for him this month. If it hadn't been for her after the explosion, everything would have ended in the shelter. The girl, after these words, went into a room in which a fire was burning in places and smoke was billowing. Lu Xing was struck by the amount of damage in the room. She waved her hand in front of her face, driving the smoke away from her nose, and asked Su-Li about what he was practicing in the room. The young man, covering his eyes with one hand, replied that the device for determining the level was exploding for the 5th time. Lu Xing prepared to write something down on a piece of paper attached to the tablet, while asking the young man what stage he had reached in his cultivation. On this she received that Su-Li is at the stage of Qi purification. The girl was surprised by this, because everyone else had already moved to the stage of laying the foundation. Su-Li was only at the stage of purification, which she told the young man about. After these words, she asked him about the level that he was able to achieve. Su Li replied to Lu Xing that he had reached the 10,000th level. The girl, with a smile, told him that he did not even know how to lie, because all beginners know that there are only 10 levels at the stage of qi purification and the laying stage is already higher. Lu Xing marked Su Li's level on a piece of paper. Besides him, there were other people there, as well as the girl herself. The young man himself stood and was silent at this moment. Lu Xing also told him that he himself knows that they all need this solitude to get into a good university. The girl reminded Su Li that the entrance exam to the martial arts university will be held next month, and only students who have passed the foundation stage can register for the entrance exam. Lu Xing became sad and then said that in the other classes, almost everyone has already moved to the laying stage, but while they are under protection, the number of monsters outside the school is growing every day. Their number has doubled since last year. According to experts, people are returning to the famine period, and this time it will last at least 50 years. As soon as this period comes, the monsters will only become more ferocious and their number will only grow. Lu Xing has a fear that it will be difficult to cope with the current group of warriors alone. Therefore, starting with the entrance exams at their school, students until the moment of admission to the university, they will have twice as many resources as before, and the study time at the university will be reduced to 3 years. Applying to the martial arts university has become even more difficult this time. The girl informed Su Li about all this. Closing his eyes, the young man replied that he understood everything, and also told Lu Xing that if she had nothing more to say, then she could go with a displeased face. The girl turned around and then walked out of the room. Su Li angrily punched the wall while saying that he only had a month left. If he can't go to the foundation stage, then he definitely won't be able to enter the martial arts university. But then a notification came to the young man's phone. Keeping one hand on the wall, he took the smartphone in the other and looked at the messages that came to him from losing. The girl wrote to Su Li that she had sent him a link to the martial arts forum. The teacher told her that if there is something that the young man does not understand, then you can look there. The second message was a link to the website of the martial arts forum. Su Li followed the link and posted a post where he wrote that he was looking for solutions because everyone else had moved to the stage of laying the foundation after the 10th level, and he was already at the 10,000th level of qi purification. He was asking about the reason why he still can't move on to the next stage. He asks for help with this issue, as well as to dispel his doubts. Below his post, there was another one where a foundation teacher would help with practice. 10 minutes later, his post had only 6 views and 0 reactions. The young man was sitting against the wall in the same place and was dissatisfied, because his post is generally a sensation. Su Li assumed that he might be the only one in the world who faced this problem. Until now, when you reach the 10th level in the stage of qi purification, the foundation is automatically created. This is the current law of the cultivation world, and it cannot be changed. So there must be something wrong with his situation. Su Li dropped the phone from his hand and, still holding one hand on the wall, buried his head against the wall and put the other hand on his chest. He felt that the aura in his body was really strengthening, but it was not concentrated. At one point, it seemed to flow throughout his body. The young man wondered if such a thing was possible. He even called himself a calendar. The loudspeaker announced that the teachers and students of the school would gather in 30 minutes at the martial arts stadium for a meeting. All the people in the school ran to the gathering place. A large young man was running up the stairs telling others to make way for him. He shouted that Uncle Ben was only at 10% of his leg strength, and they couldn't keep up with him anymore. If they want to be admitted to martial arts classes, they have to work hard. At some point, this young man overtook Su Li and then stood in front of him. He had a large build, brown hair and brown eyes, and he was taller than Su Li by 2 heads. That young man pointed his finger at Su Li and asked if it wasn't the former first place calling him by name. Also he said that Su Li looked shabby, but Su Li was not at a loss and with a smile remembering asked the name of that big guy. The young man assumed that his name was Zhao Sha, which meant stupid. That made him angry, and he shouted to Su Li that his name was Jiu Tao, and let him remember it. Su Li asked Wu, as he called him, Zhu Sha, what he wanted from him. At the same time, the young man asked Jiu Tao what was not enough for him last time, recalling the picture of how he sat on him and holding the collar of his t-shirt hit him in the face. One of the people watching their exchange said that this week, Jiu Tao was constantly looking for Su Li to compete, but every time he lost, Jiu Tao was called thick-skinned. The whispering girls assumed that he was a masochist. Jiu Tao was furious, but then his henchman told him that he had spied on the privacy report. Su Li was still at the stage of qi purification. Jiu Tao thought at that moment, noting Su Li's level, that they would see how arrogant he was. Now, the big young man laughed at Su Li and told him that hardly anyone could have imagined that their number 1 before the entrance exam would become worthless. Continuing, he said that he could not even build a foundation for laying the foundation. He, according to Zhu Tao, will be crushed at the moment by a person who is at the third level of laying the foundation. Su Li was surprised that he was able to move from the purification stage to the third level of the laying stage in a month. Others were surprised that Su Li was in the stage of chi purification. They did not believe that this was possible. It seems that Zhu Tao will win this time, because everyone knows that the purification stage will never be able to defeat the laying stage. With a smirk, Zhu Tao told Su Li that the strong always wins over the weak. These are the rules of their world. He remembered how one of the teachers told him to keep trying, and then maybe in a few years, he would catch up with Su Li. Then he was visited by memories of how Zhu Tao, standing with a bouquet of scarlet roses, was rejected by a girl who then apologized and told him that she liked Su Li better. Zhu Tao grabbed Su Li by the breasts and furiously started telling him that he was ignored by the teachers. He was rejected by a girl he liked, and it was all because of the young man. Because of him, he suffered all this time to this. Su Li told him that it was all because maybe it was all because he himself had been trying badly all this time. After that, he asked Zhu Tao, while pushing his hand away from him, what does he have to do with it at all? This angered Zhu Tao even more. After that, he embraced himself with flames and raised his fist to strike with the words that Su Li prayed that he would not see Uncle Ben again in his next life. Su Li covered himself with a completely blue aura and thought that this was the third level of the laying stage. It's powerful. At the same time, the young man clenched his hands into fist and raised them at chest level in a pose for defense and attack. At the same time, when Zhu Tao almost flew up to Su Li, his eyes opened in surprise, and after that, he flew against the wall, crashing into it, and screamed that he was in pain. His henchmen were surprised by this, so they immediately ran up to him and began to clarify whether he was okay. Su Li himself did not understand what had happened, because others said that the purification stage could never surpass the laying stage. The young man wondered about the reason why Zhu Tao flew to the wall here. The girls said that this is the strength of their number one, because even at the stage of purification, he was able to defeat a person at the stage of laying. The young man turned around, throwing on his hood, and walked in the other direction from them. One of Zhu Tao's henchmen told him that he had treated the men badly and was running away, and also warned Su Li that he would go to the teacher and report everything to him. Another henchman added that there were witnesses around. Su Li stopped and smilingly asked the other students if they had seen how badly he had treated Zhu Tao. They said that he flew away by himself. Because how can the purification stage defeat the laying stage? Perhaps Zhu Tao himself hit and flew away. The young man went on smiling and closing his eyes. Su Li decided for himself that to begin with, he would go to the gathering and then maybe the teacher would answer his question. Zhu Tao was leaning over at that moment, and he was sick. There were already some people at the gathering place, and sometimes birds were flying. Su Li walked along the blue glowing road to the same color portal. A loudspeaker hovered next to him wishing Su Li a successful completion of the entrance exams, and also told them to try together in the future. Su Li, at that moment, thought that if the problem with the laying stage was not solved, it was unlikely that he would be able to enroll. After that, the young man found himself on the training ground of Qiaoan High School. This was the 100th admission ceremony of the Qian school. Someone said that Su Li had finally come. The young man greeted a large teacher with glasses. This teacher was the supervisor of the third group of the third year of high school. Sun Hui. He asked Su Li how the month of seclusion had gone. The young man answered him that he had encountered a small problem. The teacher adjusted his glasses and said he would look at his progress during this time. After that, Sun Hui approached Su Li, and then a blue-colored aura appeared around the two of them. In a small wind rose. The teacher was surprised, and his hair, which was located on his head, on the sides of the bald spot. The man at this moment was thinking that breathing is very dense. Not that he but even the director is not able to do such an elementary thing at this level. He wondered why Su Li was still in the purification stage. Sun Hui was still standing with shaggy hair, and Su Li, at that moment, said that he had heard about a major breakthrough in technology that had recently occurred. So he asked him if the teacher would like to try to save his hair. The teacher slapped the young man in the face with a notebook and told him that instead of worrying about him, it was better to let him worry about himself. First, the martial arts university has already met the students of the school, but there is only a month left before the exams begin. At the moment, Su Li has to overcome the stage of purification within 1 month and go to the stage of Lan. Otherwise, the young man will have to change his specialty, which Sun Hui had warned him about. Also, the teacher said that Su Li doesn't need to worry so much, because everything will settle by itself. After all, his future won't end at school. Sun Hui put his hand on the young man's shoulder and informed him that as soon as he was more collected, the trial of the kingdom would begin. Su Li can leave by himself saying any reason, because they don't know his cultivation base. He doesn't need to tell them either. The young man wanted to say something to this, but was interrupted by the teacher, who said that he knew that Su Li would not give up so easily. After these words, Sun Hui asked him what level of chi purification the young man was at. Su Li replied that he was at the 10,000th level. The teacher was amazed and asked again about his level, but then they were interrupted by a scream and something falling on the training ground, and after that, a cloud of dust rose there. Someone shouted, asking for quick help to the wounded men. Sun Hui and Su Li ran in that direction. A black-haired woman with glasses and torn clothes was lying in a small crater. Sun Hui began to treat this woman on his own, and the medics with a stretcher had already approached them. Meanwhile, the teacher said that the woman has a very serious injury. The injury was probably inflicted by someone at the peak of the laying stage. These words surprised Su Li, and he asked the men about it. Something flashed in the sky, and the students who saw it called others to turn their attention to it. It was the headmaster of the school. As the students said, one man yawned and then said he was terribly tired. This man was a school security guard, and his colleague, also a security guard, was sitting not far from him. The guard who yawned was sitting with his back, leaning against the window and said that he had not slept last night, and therefore, then asked another to monitor the situation for him while he took a nap. The second one, in response to his words, reminded him with displeasure that they currently have working hours for which the guard who did not get enough sleep told him not to worry, because the strongest gathered at Caillou in high school. It is unlikely that something will happen. After these words, he sprawled on a chair, covered his eyes with his cap, and got ready to sleep. But behind the glass that was behind him, 5 people appeared. In front of these people stood a tall, beefy, blond man with a scar running through his forehead and left eye. On the sides of the blond, 2 young men stood and smiled looking at the resting guard, and behind them there were 2 more, a man with glasses and a guy. Another guard asked them if they were students of the school because he had not seen them before, and then asked them to show their student cards. The blonde-haired man smiled, clenching his teeth tightly. After that, the man broke through the wall in which there was a window and his self. Then he grabbed the sitting guard, pinning him to the floor, saying that apparently he was not taught that strength is a ticket to any place. The man's eyes completely turned red and began to glow. The second guard, trembling with fear, tried to reach the radio, and thought that this was a bad situation, so we need to report it faster. And the first guard at that moment was hanging like a rag doll grabbed by the blonde man's head. But then the guy who was standing next to him, before the attack on the guards, came into the room after the men. His eyes were the same as the blonde's. The guy was smiling and throwing a small stone with his hand. This guy threw a pebble with superhuman strength into the head of the guard who tried to ask for help through the radio. A puddle of blood splashed and the guard's hand froze a few centimeters from the radio. The intruders went on with smiles, leaving behind the bodies of the guards. Chapter 2. The students of the school stared in amazement at the appearance of the director. They talked about the fact that the ability to fly on a golden sword can only be achieved after reaching the golden pill. The principal of the Keiuman school is an elderly man with long gray hair and a thick gray mustache. He was dressed in a pantsuit, an elongated jacket and a white scarf were draped over his shoulders. The man's name is Wu De Fa. This is the principal of the Qi Yuan school. The disciples looking at him hoped that they would be able to reach the golden pill as quickly as possible. The director arrived standing on a golden sword. The woman who landed in the crater regained consciousness and barely said anything about Erminon at death. Then she lost consciousness again. The director of the school told the doctors to help the woman first. Also, he announced that the 100th test ceremony in honor of admission to the University of Martial Arts has been suspended. The students were amazed by this, and they began to talk that something serious must have happened since the ceremony was interrupted, because this has not been done since the founding of the Caiyuan school. They hoped it wouldn't affect their entrance exams. The director went to the center of the arena, and then loudly asked the students to behave more restrained. After that, Yudafan announced that the school had just received news that the Ermenkan order operating in the city was involved in the incident. In order to ensure safety, the school restricts access to a free exit from the school, so the director asked them not to be heroic. Also, Yudafan said that each curator should ensure the safety of students. It is necessary to follow all instructions in an organized manner. The students were shocked by his announcement about the guilt of the Yermingan order. After that, some began to run away from the arena while saying that this is the same order that will even go over their heads just to get their way. The disciples have heard that the order does not hesitate to get rid of cultivators, so they are afraid for everyone. The reason for the appearance of the Ermengan order in the city of Wuji was unclear, hoping that everything would be fine with them. Someone in this dream stopped Su Li by grabbing his arm. He turned around and saw Lu Xing. The girl was smiling and pulling the young man somewhere. The young man asked where she was going. She turned around and told Su Li that it was related to his entrance exams. After a while, they found themselves in a small garden. Lu Xing told the young man that such an opportunity comes only once in a lifetime. Su Li also asked what kind of opportunity we are talking about. Lu Xing started talking about the fact that a reward has been announced for the mission in Wuji City, and the whole thing is that Ermenkan is planning to invade their school. She was holding some paper that was rolled up into a tube. She also told Su Li that if he caught the people from Ermenkan, then the martial arts university would definitely see his strength, and they would definitely accept the young men in her hands. She was holding an already unfolded piece of paper. It was written about the world search, namely, the Order of Ermengen is wanted. Below this inscription were depicted 5 people, 5 men. They were all united by a tattoo in the form of a snake in the shape of an 8, passing from the neck to the shoulder and collarbone and located on the left side. Under their portraits, there was an inscription about the reward, namely, that 1 million was due. Sula asked the girl how she found out about this information. Lu Xing replied that her parents are law enforcement officers. They told her to be more observant. She also told him not to worry, because she would find people who could help him. Approaching him, Lu Xing whispered in his ear that they would share the reward equally, so everyone would be in the black, because besides, Su Li would definitely be able to enroll in the University of Martial Arts. At that moment, both were confused. The young man threw the paper aside and told the girl that he wouldn't go, so he just wanted to go back to the dorm. At this moment, he was thinking that he was still at the stage of chi purification. If he goes to fight with such murderers, he will certainly die because he does not look like a stupid person. Lu Xing was unhappy with his answer, because, as she said, it was merciful on her part, but he does not appreciate the kindness of the girl at all. At the same time, she stamped her foot with displeasure and called him an idiot. Some student called Teacher Sun and notified him that there were problems. Teacher Sun Hui ran up to that student, asking him about what had happened. This student was Jiao Tao's ward. He said that Su Li and Jiao Tao had an argument. Several ribs were broken. They vomited blood. In general, they were left without strength. The teacher asked him if they had been helped, and then asked him to take him there. The young man agreed, and at that moment, Sun Hui thought that Su Li was still purifying her chi, so she was clearly not Jiao Tao's equal. After that, Sun Hui summoned his power, enveloped himself in a blue vortex, grabbed Jiao Tao's ward, and they rushed, with the help of his forces, in that direction. Men's dormitory, third-year building of Chiyuan High School. The dormitory was a tall gray building, similar to a residential building. The men with the scar said about the current mission, mainly that within 24 hours, it is necessary to kill the observer for the entrance exams of the Qianhuang High School. This was said by a man named Ao Ma. He was among the wanted. There were others with him, namely a man in black, round glasses, Magic Sang, a brown-haired guy Wang Qi, a short, red-haired young man, Xing Guang, a guy with long purple hair, Nang Yang Wei. Ao Ma threw his arms over the shoulders of Magic Sang and Wang Qi leaning on them, and said that the men's dormitory was a good place for them to hide, because the school teachers would definitely not think of looking for them in this place. Basically, they are the only ones responsible for this mission. Judging by their cultivation base, even if they stumble upon 5 or 6 teachers, they will still easily deal with them, and accordingly, the observer is in their teeth. The blonde man told them about all this. Hao Ma squeezed Wang He's neck with his hand, and said that if the situation from the past repeats and they let someone leave, the consequences for them will be severe. Then he told the others to take action. Magic Sang and Xing Guang jumped onto the ceiling and moved forward on it. Wang He Liang Yang, we ran forward on the floor, and Alma remained standing in place, smiling triumphantly and with his hands on his hips. Su Li was sitting in his room. Then a notification came to his phone. It was a new comment on his post. The young man suggested that his post is becoming more popular because comments are already being typed. He was greeted by another young man who introduced himself as Minghui. He was with a basic level of cultivation. The young man wrote that he does not think about the possibility of being at the 10,000th level of purification of Kai Su Lai, which he is talking about. Meng Hui lived in the Martial Arts University dormitory and lived in room 101. He had dark blue hair, almost black in color, and also he wore glasses. Meng Hui was communicating on the forum via a computer. Su Li texted him that it was true to this. He received the answer that, first of all, he should understand that after reaching the 10th level of Qi purification, regardless of what skills he has, he, in any case, forms the basis for cultivation. Also, Minghui wrote that if Su Li really has a 10,000th level, as he says, then he must have inexhaustible energy. Su Li also thought that if this is true, then it turns out that he has a very large reserve of energy. He can be invincible. Meng Hui also wrote that he nevertheless offers to check the reliability of the device with which the measurements are carried out. He himself was laughing at the young man at that moment and thinking about why he should respond to such messages. For him, the current applicants are somehow inadequate. His gaze was arrogant. Su Li, after this communication, put the phone on the table with the screen down, and thought that he didn't care, as no one believed him. Su Li left his room at number 521. Walking down the corridor, he noticed that it was somehow too quiet. The young man decided to go to a safe place in case the Order of Ermengen shows up. At that moment, he saw Wang He walking down the corridor. The guy at that moment thought that maybe there should still be people in the dorm at that time. After that, thinking who Su Li was, the young man himself was trying to figure out who the guy he met was. It seems to him that he has not seen him before. Wang He was glad that he was wearing a windbreaker from his school uniform. Otherwise he would definitely have been caught. Su Li didn't say anything, but he noticed that points should be deducted for wearing such a uniform. The guy at that moment abruptly remembered covering the tattoo that he had forgotten to cover it, so he assumed that the young man recognized him. After that, he asked Su Li if he had seen her. Su Li himself did not understand what he was talking about, specifically assuming that he wanted to quarrel with him, but did not understand why the guy was doing this. But nevertheless, the young man agreed. Wang He smiled fiercely and took off his windbreaker with one hand. After that, the guy sat down a little, surrounding himself with a black and red ore, and his eyes became completely red. He said that, in this case, he had no way out, so he would have to kill the young man. Su Li was surprised by this, and Wang He rushed into the attack at that moment, while saying that he only has a level of chi purification. If he aligns with him, he will not be able to survive. Su Li noticed the snake tattoo on Wang He's neck, and wondered why this sign seemed so familiar to him. The image of wanted people that Lu Xing had shown him earlier immediately appeared in his mind. On one of them, there was just a silhouette of Wang He. After that, the young man realized that he was from Erminan Wang. He was already raising his fist to strike. At that moment, Su Li was able to dodge the attack, but she was not stopped, and therefore, because of her, the wall behind the young man was destroyed. Su Li turned around to look at the destroyed wall and thought that the guy must be at the peak of laying the foundation, and if he hits him, he may die. Wang raised both hands above his head, this time to attack. While squeezing them into a lock, he tried to attack the young man from behind, while thinking that Su Li would not even be able to defend himself properly. So it's over for him. Su Li's eyes lit up with a blue glow, and then he was completely surrounded by this light. It was this that stopped Wang He's attack, which shocked him and did not understand what had happened. Chapter 3. Su Li, declaring himself an aura, threw off Wang Qi. The guy did not understand what had happened. He wondered if the young man was really at the level of chi purification. He had not seen such energy even among the representatives of the Golden Pill. The young man embraced himself with a blue aura. Wang He turned to Su Li while grabbing himself by the collar of his t-shirt, and then tore it off and said that, how dare he behave like that, being at the level of chi purification. This young man angered him. Wang He embraced himself with a fiery aura and began attacking the young man with the fist of the meteor line. At the same time, he thought that this time he would definitely defeat the young man. Su Li took his attack, protecting himself with an aura, and with his hands folded in a defensive gesture, the young man understood that he could only defend himself. Wang He didn't understand what was going on, because he couldn't move, and it seemed to him that his power was being absorbed by Su Li. In addition, the guy was surrounded by the energy of a young man, and he thought that he had endless energy. Su Li gathered energy in his fist, raised it to strike, and then attacked Wang Qi, who then flew to the wall and the floor cracked around the young man himself. Su Li was surprised by this. When he approached Wang Qi, he saw that he was lying unconscious and there was his blood on the wall. Su Li didn't understand what was wrong with Wang He. He walked back and forth in front of him and did not understand how he could defeat a man with the foundations laid. There must have been something wrong with that. The young man suggested that it could all be because of his large amount of energy. At the same time, he recalled the correspondence with Manhwa about his endless supply of energy. Su Li thought that besides, during the battle Wang He's blood began to boil. If he took some medicine, then he could have had a myocardial infarction. The young man knocked the fist of his right hand against the palm of his left, saying at the same time that he was just lucky. Su Li thought that it was better for him not to leave Wang Qi in the corridor, because his allies might find him there. Su Li threw the hood of the windbreaker over his head, then grabbed Wang He by the hair and dragged him somewhere. Meanwhile, the academic building, Sun Hui and a disciple flew through the air on a blue sword from the teacher's power. Finally, they landed, finding themselves near Zhu Tao, sitting on the ground. There was a dent in the wall next to his back, and his henchman was sitting on the side. Sun Hui looked at this picture and could not understand what could cause such a destructive force. He took a round pill from the breast pocket of his vest. The teacher sat down in front of Zhu Tao, fed him that pill and asked about what had happened. A green aura appeared around the young man, and his wounds began to heal. Zhu Tao replied at that moment that he and Su Li had had an argument. He didn't think that he would be so serious, and when Zhu Tao realized everything he was already slammed into the wall. Sun Hui did not understand how a person with the third stage of laying the foundations could suffer from the purification of qi. After all, this is simply impossible. Zhu Tao's henchman started talking about how Su Li was still at the QI purification level. Then how could he defeat Zhu Tao? They assumed that he must have resorted to dastardly methods. Therefore the teacher must deal with him. Teacher Sun Hui thought that he has been teaching them for 3 years, so they probably think that he has not figured them out. For him, they are capable of more than that. Aloud, he told them that to begin with, let them take Jiu Tao to a safe place and he would sort everything out for now. While Jiu Tao and one of his subordinates who was holding him were leaving, the teacher watched them go, while the second subordinate bowed to Sun Hueta and said goodbye to him. Then someone asked the teacher about what had happened after that. He turned around and replied, waving his arms, that it was nothing, just a student skirmish. Two people appeared to his gaze, namely, a woman with a curvy shape, with black hair and a square hairstyle and glasses. The woman was dressed in a white shirt and a tight black skirt, and she had a red bandage on her forearm. Next to her was a man of strong build with black hair, dressed in a white shirt and black trousers, and on his face he had sunglasses. The woman told Teacher Sun that the director had upgraded the mission to the rank of the killers had reached the 3rd level of laying the foundations. Besides, they had deadly weapons with them. So she asked him to be careful. The teacher thought about this mission of Runka. After all, in recent years, there have been few missions of this rank. Erminon must have been well prepared. He supposed observation room. There were several tables in the room, near which there were computer chairs and there were computers on the tables. Sun Hui was standing near one of these tables. He looked at the computer monitor and thought about Su Li praying for the absence of a meeting with him in the next life. Also, he thought that Zhu Tao was aware of Su Li's problems. Besides, Jiu Tao used to be number 2. It was some kind of imbalance. The teacher watched a video of Zhu Tao and Su Li fighting, namely, the moment with Jiu Tao throwing. Sun Hui was amazed that Su Li had defeated a young man who was at the 3rd level of laying the foundations. He assumed about sudden blows. There is a sudden burst of energy which leads to a critical energy value. There is a random impulse, thanks to which you can defeat an opponent in just one blow whose rank is an order of magnitude higher than your own. But there are very few such cases. Cultivation levels, Kai purification, foundation, laying golden pill, union, transformation, return, deliverance, Mahayana and disaster. Sun Hui had turned off the computer. He began to think that Su Li has good abilities. Therefore, it is necessary to help him with admission to the University of Martial Arts. At this moment, one of the Ermengan order was moving along the ceiling above the teacher. It was Xian Guang. He had a dagger in his mouth. Sun Hui saw the gleam of a dagger in the computer monitor when Xing Guang jumped with an attack on the teacher. Sun Hui formed an emerald-colored energy in his right hand with which he put a shield on Zhen Guang's attack. Thanks to this action, the dagger flew out of the guy's hands, and he himself was thrown away. When Xing Guang landed on his feet, he told the teacher, with a big smile, that initially he just wanted to find some information in the observation room and did not expect to meet someone in it. Sun Hui was angry because he saw the guy's tattoo. The teacher said out loud about Erming and that they pretended to be students to get inside. The red-haired man only said that he could not leave the men alive, after which he quickly went on the attack, surrounding himself with orange-colored lightning under his feet. And around Sun Hui circles of emerald color began to appear at the same time he was standing in a fighting stance. Xing Guang attacked, first with his fist, then with his elbow and then with his foot. But Sun Hui defended himself from the entire shield in the form of a blurry haze forming a circle, having covered himself from the last attack of the guy. The teacher shielded himself with his hands holding a shield with them. The guy raised his fist for a new furious attack, while saying that the teacher is a dead man who, after his attack, will be like a turtle. But Sun Hui surprised the red-haired man by catching his fist in his left hand. In his right hand, the man formed energy, which then covered his arm and attacked Xing Guang in the stomach with his hand. The redhead flew into the wall, causing damage to it. Blood gushed out of his mouth. Xing Guang sank to the floor while holding onto the place of impact in the solar plexus with one hand and tried to clear his throat. But at the same time, he stared intently and angrily at the teacher. At this moment, the red-haired man was thinking that Sun Hui is very strong, so he has no other way out. After these thoughts, Xing Guang took out some graphite-colored balls from his pants pocket and told the teacher that he would get even with him later. Then the guy threw the balls on the floor, which then caused a smoke screen to rise. Sun Hui was thinking that he needed to report the penetration of Ermingan into the school campus. His gaze was full of seriousness. Chapter 4. Meanwhile, the male dormitory of the Qian school, Liang Yang Hui and Magic Sang were in one of the rooms. The first one asked the black-haired man about the reason why Wang He has not returned yet. At the same time he was holding and smoking a pipe. Liang Yang Hui, with a smirk on his face, suggested that he might have been killed. Magic Zen replied by saying that Wang He is a cultivator of the 9th rank, so he is not so easy to kill. After that, he decided to follow him, which he told his friend about the black-haired man being already outside that office. Said out loud that Lang Yang, we had just got to the rank of the golden pill, and he was already so brave. But Magic Sang was sure that he and Wang He would soon catch up with him coming out of the corner of the corridor. Magic Sang saw someone. His eyes widened in surprise, and all because he saw Wang Qi, the defeated and dead Wang Qi, who was dragged by a young man with one hand leaving a trail of blood on the floor. Magic Sang hid behind a corner. He was shaking with fear, and he thought that maybe that guy wants to show off Ban. He defeated for the men. The situation was turbulent. He did not understand what to do, because the young man is not a weakling. Since he was able to deal with Wang Qi alone, he was afraid he might end up the same way. He decided to do something because of the lack of other options while taking something covered in fire from his inner breast pocket. It was a gun magic. Singh recalled his conversation with Alma, namely, as a blonde man having given a gun to a black-haired man in his hands. He said that this gun was the latest weapon developed by Ermengarde. It absorbs spiritual power and then abruptly throws it out. At the same time, it increases the power of the blow several times compared to the usual strength of cultivators. Magic Sang was smiling broadly, gritting his teeth, and thinking that the power of the shot would be more powerful than during the golden pill period. After that, he abruptly jumped out from around the corner, thinking that he would certainly defeat the young man, and began to form energy in the gun. After sufficient energy formation, the black-haired man fired. This energy was also felt by other people who were outside the hostel, and the bullet was flying at the young man's head with might and main, but she flew off his head into the wall next to Magic Sang's head, which scared him and then flew to the floor at the feet of the young man. This youth was Su Li. He took off his hood, but the bullet did no harm. The young man did not understand what had happened, so he turned around to look. Su Li saw a bullet in the floor, which caused cracks in the floor. The young man sat down and picked up the flattened bullet. He looked at her while considering her a piece of iron and also wondering where she even came from. Several people gathered near the hostel. Among them were Director Wu Difat and teacher Sun Hewitt. The director told the teacher that he also noticed fluctuations in strength, assuming that it was the work of Ermengarde. Sun Hewitt agreed with him, saying at the same time that he was attacked by one of them in the training building. He suggested that they could be everywhere, but their conversation was interrupted by some stirring from the forest. The director asked who was there while forming a golden sphere in his hands. It was Lu Xing who, when she got out of the bushes, waved her hands to them and greeted the principal and the teacher. They were surprised at the appearance of the girl, and asked how she ended up in this place. Lu Xing said she was looking for Su Li because she was afraid he might be in danger. The teacher tensely asked her about the fact that Su Li was still in the dorm. A woman with glasses was also in front of the hostel with them, and was trying to figure out what to do, because the young man probably already encountered members of the Ermengarde. Sun Hui turned around, but the director at that moment told him not to act recklessly, because the person who released such energy is at the rank of a golden pill, no less. But the teacher did not listen to him resolutely, going forward, and saying that one of their students was still inside. He needed help. At the same time, he thought that even if Su Li uses the technique that he used during the fight with Zhu Tao, his opponent is at the rank of the golden pill, so it won't help him. The director at Def cleared his throat, attracting the teacher's attention, but he did not pay attention to it. After that, the headmaster appeared in front of Sun Hewitt and said that, as the headmaster of the school, he could not leave it like this. Then he summoned the golden sword and said that he would go ahead. A man and a woman began to take out some black sticks that were located behind their backs and on their hips. While they were doing this, the director told them to walk behind and tread carefully. After that, they all went inside the dorm. Meanwhile, Su Li noticed Magic Sang in front of him and thought that the bullet had fallen from him. The young man noticed a revolver in the man's hand and thought that he had decided to kill him. Magic Sang was shaking with fear and trying to force himself to move. He was thinking that he had failed, so he needed to leave as soon as possible. The man was afraid that Su Li would attack him and start torturing him so his death would not be painless. Su Li stared intently at the man and did not understand what he was doing. At first, according to the young man, he threw pieces of iron and then he beats himself at all. Does the man really want the young man to run away from him? Su Li clutched the bullet in his hands and was grateful to Magic. Say aloud. The young man said that perhaps he would not be able to defeat him, but he could not leave everything like this. The men didn't understand what he was talking about. Meanwhile, Su Li prepared to attack, making a swing with the hand that had the bullet in it. The young man thought that he would use this piece of iron to distract attention, and then he would strike and defeat him. Su Li threw a bullet at the man, shouting that he was returning it. Magic Sang stood and shook with fear, while mentally asking for help. He was thinking about why he couldn't move. After that, the bullet flew through Magic Sang's body, went limp and fell. The young man was surprised that he had succeeded, and thought that he might have talents that he had not noticed before. He had a hard time with one intruder and then another one appeared. Then Su Li noticed a revolver that was lying not far from the man's body. The young man ran up to the gun, which was still burning with energy. He took it in his hand, saying with a smile that the gun looked impressive, so he would take it away. Perhaps it might come in handy. Liang Yang, we was hiding behind one of the corners, watching the youth. He didn't understand what was wrong with him and how he could have killed Wang He Majixi. Liang Yang, we understood that fighting face to face was certain death for him, but if he left, he would also die, and attacking stealthily was also risky. The man was preparing for an attack, summoning energy to one of his hands. He was tense about the development of events, but then he was interrupted by someone calling from the stairs that led to the floor where he and the young man were. Liang Yang, we realized that one of the owners of the golden pill was on the way, so he had to leave with his hand. He dispelled the energy. Chapter 5. Liang Yang abruptly ran away from where he had been standing, towards the corridor. The director and the others hid behind the wall on the stairwell. At that moment, Su Li hid the gun in his belt at his stomach. He was wondering what to do, because, judging by the voice, it was the director. Su Li thought that if those who came to his aid saw the bodies around him, they would think that he was one of the members of the Ermingen. The young man was thinking about what he should do. An idea came to his head, thanks to which he decided to improvise. The young man came up with the idea to make it look like they themselves fell on each other and then dragged the bodies of the men who lost to him. After that, he put them right next to each other. He made Wang He's left hand clenched into a fist, rested on Magic Sang's forehead, and his right hand held his right hand clenched into a fist at his chest. But then from a flight of stairs into the corridor where Su Li was the director, burst in. The director was surprised by the presence of the young man, so he asked him where he came from there at all, and also what he was doing there. Su Li laughed awkwardly because of his questions, but then an explosion rang out on the floor, which completely blew out one window, and then Liang Yanghui jumped out of it. When he landed, he looked back at the dorm building. After that, he went to his wall and activated purple energy on his hand, which began to flow around him. Yang Yanghui was smiling broadly, summoning more and more of his energy and directing it into the building. Thanks to this energy, he saw where the people who are inside the hostel are and what they are doing. Thanks to the energy, some kind of dragon was also shown, which was in an incomprehensible and unknown place. It was a battlefield. A man fought a dragon but was easily defeated. The dragon looked out with his red eye from the portal that was in the dormitory. Su Li greeted the principal, the teacher and the headman who came to him at that moment. The young man thought that they would understand everything. The director approached the bodies of the fallen and asked the young man what it was. Su Li's eye stiffened, and the director turned around and looked at him with a serious look. Here Def was enveloped in his energy, glowing with a golden glow. After that, he directed it at the young man who covered himself with his hands and began to talk about the mistake. But Su Li felt that the energy was not dangerous for him. He was very scared, afraid that the director might do something to him. Wuda Fao was thinking at that moment that Su Li was still at the stage of chi purification, thinking that someone else was responsible for the deaths of those people. After that, he cleared his throat, and after that, he told the young man to leave there. Otherwise he could be in danger. At any moment, the director used his energy and found out that the victims were at the stage of laying the foundations. He didn't understand how someone could kill the two of them. At once, he began to feel their bodies first. Wang He noted that his body did not transform and was often beaten. Wang He took nerve-stimulating drugs all year round, and the cause of his death was a soul rupture. After that, Wudufa proceeded to examine Magic Sang's wound. He realized that it was a fatal blow, and the person who inflicted it should be at the level of a golden pill, and no less. Su Li definitely had nothing to do with it. The director pulled back the collar of Magic Sang's clothes and looked at his tattoo. After that, he confirmed that they were members of Yermungand. The man's gaze was frowning. Def stuck his sword in the floor. The director thought about what he needed to look at, because perhaps to find some clues, because the members of the Yermangan would not have come to school just like that. The man adjusted his gloves and began to take pills out of the pockets of the dead. He listed that the Dabo pill, the Sijui pill, the Chanling pill, all do not fit. After listing them, he put those pills in the breast pocket of his vest. Su Li told the director that he was not quite convincing, and also that if he did not need it, then let him give the pills to the young man, because they might be useful to him. But then the director found something in the pocket of Wang He's pants. He took it in his hand, or rather, an unusual cube of black color with red glowing inclusions. Def said it was a tetragonal seal. Apart from a specialist, no one else knows how to open it. The material of the seal is very hard, so it will not be possible to simply break it. After these words, the director handed the seal to teacher Sun Huaida, asking him to send the seal to the laboratory later, where it could be opened. The teacher accepted the seal, but then the cube fell, hit the floor and then flew up to Su Li and hit his sneakers. Because of this, the seal exploded. It amazed everyone. Sun Hui suggested that perhaps it was Su Li's energy raging again. Su Li sat down on the floor, reaching for the cube with his hand, while saying that it was not his fault for what had happened. The young man, at this moment, was thinking about what he had been told about the difficulty of opening the seal, then why it opened. The young man picked up some kind of plate with a small red flashlight which was inside the cube, and said that it was a communicator. The director immediately took him away. Yudef said that the cipher is not particularly complicated, so he can easily figure it out. The director summoned his power and held the communicator with energy over his palm. The communicator's light bulb turned green and it opened a hologram of a man in a rope and with a tattoo of Ermengarde appeared to the eyes of those present. This person was saying that after Huang Haibo, the supervisor of the entrance exams, comes to Qian school, the order members should send 2 people to divert attention and kill the observer. The rest must destroy the energy collection tower. According to the original plan, the men in the robe told the members of the Order of Ermengarde not to make a mistake. After these words of his, the recording ended and the hologram disappeared. The director informed everyone that the purpose of the Ermengen was not an observer. Their true mission was the destruction of the energy tower. Also, he added that the two defeated were just puppets. Wadafa also said that as soon as the tower collapses, about 60% of the buildings will be unusable, so they will not receive energy. The energy stored in the tower will immediately spill out, with a force equivalent to an atomic bomb, which will spread to the entire city. The director was very tense and informed everyone that the real target was Wuji City. Chapter 6. Su Li raised his hand and said, turning to the director, that he had a question. The young man asked the director that if everything is so, then how could such important information be in the hands of the wrong people? Lu Xing agreed with the young man's words and said that the information might not be true, but it could still cause panic. The director replied that regardless of the reliability, they must protect the tower, as it is a matter of security for the whole city. If they don't do anything, all cultivators will fail because of Ermengen. That's what Director Wu to Fa said. He was furious and involuntarily released his energy, the power of which amazed Su Li and Lu Xing. The director took out his phone on the screen, of which it was written that he had failed to send a message. Everyone present started checking their phones for a signal. As a result, no one had a connection. They didn't understand what was going on. After that, it was decided to split up. A man and a woman ran into one corridor, and the principal, teacher Xin Su Li and Lu Xing ran in the other direction. They had to hurry up and publish the news. The director, running out from around the corner, saw some kind of portal. He did not understand how it happened and where the stairs disappeared down. The others who came running after him also didn't understand anything. Su Li started to walk towards the portal, but the director stopped him and said that it was probably the tricks of the Yerminghan who wanted to lure them into a trap and cut off contacts between the outside world. Also, he said that first they need to find out if they can get to other places. They turned around after the words from death and went in the other direction from the portal. At that moment, something began to appear from the portal. It was something inhuman with scales and claws. His eyes were burning red. They all ran down the corridor together and saw that the bodies on the floor that had been lying there earlier were not in place. Lu Xing pointed her finger at that place and said about this fact. They ran up to that place. The director sat down on the floor and ran his gloves over the floor. Looking closely at his fingers, he said that the floor was covered with dust. Besides, there was northwest blood in that place. The bodies most likely just disappeared. But then Def said they were on the wrong floor. Lu Xing and Su Li looked back at the corridor they had come from. The girl said that, how is this possible? Because they were definitely returning the same way. But then they noticed that the principal and the teacher were not with them. They began to look around. Su Li suddenly took the girl's hand, thereby embarrassing her, and after that, he led Lu Xing down the corridor, continuing to hold his hand. At the same time, he himself was embarrassed and said that there was no director and teacher, so they should not be separated because of this. They should stick together. Lu Xing was still confused, but they did not see that a dragon was crawling on the ceiling ahead of them. When he crawled up to them, he tried to attack the girl, opening his mouth wide and wanting to eat her, but Su Li managed to sense the danger. Thanks to this, the young man managed to pull the girl almost out of the monster's mouth. Lu 11 and the monster's gazes crossed. After that, the young man pulled the girl after him, telling her that they were running away. The monster was rushing after them, almost catching up with them. Then Su Li saw an open door to one of the rooms. He pulled Lu Xing into it and closed the door. With lightning speed, they started moving things to the door. They were boxes, suitcases and stuff. The monster was trying to get to them by knocking on the door. He knocked on the door with such force that cracks began to spread around it on the wall, and at some point he calmed down. Su Li and Lu Xing leaned against the things that were propping up the door. The girl tried to pull her hand out of the young man's hand, but he did not let her do it, strengthening his grip, which surprised the girl. Su Li, trying to catch his breath, asked the girl if she was okay. The girl, breathing heavily, turned away in embarrassment and agreed. Su Li didn't understand what was wrong with her, but they didn't know yet that two blue eyes were watching them from the ventilation. They were the eyes of a monster. Chapter 7. The monster broke through the ventilation grate with his paw, and then he broke through this grate to the end, sticking half of his body out of the ventilation and growled loudly. At that moment, Lu Xing clung to Su Li in fright and screamed. Su Li took out a pistol from his belt, which was raised near Magic Sang's body. At the same time, the young man thought about what he had almost forgotten. And also Su Li did not quite understand how to use this gun. Su Li thought that he could only take full advantage of one thing. After that, the young man pointed the blazing gun at the monster, accumulating energy for the shot. The monster itself was advancing on him at that moment, its mouth wide open. There was a shot. Su Li's hands twitched from the recoil, and the monster was hit by an attack, or rather, a shot from a pistol, like from a laser cannon. Lu Xing was clinging to the young man at the moment of the shot. Su Li was glad that his idea was a success. When the monster fell defeated, the girl still holding on to Su Li asked him about where he got this gun. To this she received an answer that he found it from the defeated members of the Ermin clan and he simply forgot to give it to the director. Su Li and Lu Xing were sitting on the floor in front of the body of the defeated monster under whose body a pool of blood was spreading. They both didn't understand what kind of monster it was. He seemed creepy to them. Lu Xing looked at the monster with a serious face and said about the sharp corners on it, similar to the blades of the handle. A portrait of this monster, or rather the ancient horned dragon. Astro's rat ops appeared in her head. There was also a description of him. The dragon had a mobile body. The head was covered with protruding horns. Besides very sharp, most often the dragon lives in groups. Lu Xing told the young man that, if she thinks correctly, this monster is a horned dragon. Su Li was startled by this. The girl also said that this is a kind of social monster, and this means that there can be 510, or even more. At this moment, several dragons, like the one Su Li defeated, were passing through the corridor. One of the dragons passed by the door of the room where the guys were. Su Li was looking through the peephole of the door at this moment, standing ready to attack. He was thinking that when there was only one dragon left in the corridor, they would have a chance to get out. The young man looked at the frightened Lu Xing who was sitting on the floor next to him. Su Li told her not to worry too much, because everything would be fine once they find the source of the dragons. Su Li thinks that they will be able to return the dorm to its original state and get out of there. The young man asked that. Besides, hadn't he just dealt with the monster? Also, he told Lu Xing to calm down, because he wouldn't let Yermingan's plans come to fruition. At that moment, Xing Guang sneezed. He and Liang Yang Wei were on the grounds of Qiyuan School. They were sitting on one of the school buildings. The young man asked Liang Yang Wei about how their plan was progressing. Liang Yang Wei, smoking a pipe, said, with a serious impression that Wang He and Magic Sang were dead. Xing Guang was shocked and asked the senior comrade about how it happened. The answer to this question was given to him that Wang He and Magic Sang were too careless and underestimated the enemy in Liang Yang Li's eyes. Su Li was a fierce and incredibly strong young man. He had never seen such strong people before, so the men hoped that he would never meet Su Li again. Xing Guang took out a red stone on which the sign of the Order of Ermincan was located in the middle. He said they definitely needed to report everything. Liang Yang, we rushed to stop him at the same time. He told the young men, in no case should they say anything, because if the commander finds out that they could not even deal with the student, then he will definitely get angry. They didn't know what to do. An image of an evil commander appeared in Xing Guang's head, tearing them apart. The young men began to shake with fear, and said that the fact was that Lang Yang, we had not seen their commander in action, because if they did not complete the task, they would definitely come to an end. But Lang Yang, we only grinned at these words of his and said that it was not worth worrying, because he lured the headmaster of the Qian school and that student into a trap. Now they definitely won't be hindered by anything. At the same time, Liang Yang, we said all this approaching right next to Zhen Guang. He also said that if they completed the task, no one would even remember Wang He and Magic Sang. Liang Yang. We held a canopy in one hand with the help of an energy communicator, and said that they were continuing. At that moment, a hologram of the school grounds appeared from the communicator. Meanwhile, one dragon was moving along the corridor. Su Li listened to what was going on outside the door and then said that he and Lu Xing were starting. The young man put his hand on the door handle and then abruptly opened it. Su Li, holding Lu Xing's hand, flew out of the room and concentrated the energy in the gun preparing to fire it. The monster turned his head in their direction, but he did not have time to do anything as he was hit by a pistol shot, which caused his head to separate from his body. The dormitory was surrounded by a dark-colored dome that sparkled with purple lightning. Director Wu Dafat and teacher Sun Dawei were on the 8th floor of the dormitory, while Su Li and Lu Xing were on the 2nd floor. The portal from which the monsters came out was on the stairway from the 1st to the 2nd floor. Teacher Sun said that everything was strange because a lot of time has passed, but they still can't determine their location. The director also said opening the doors to some room that in any case, they needed to find Su Li and Lu Xing as soon as possible, because they could be in danger. In his opinion, the students were not yet able to resist, but then behind the slightly open doors, the teacher and the director saw some monsters, which were dragons. After a momentary surprise, both sides prepared to attack. The dragons went on the attack first, but came across a golden-colored shield which surrounded himself and the teacher-director at death. After that, the director told teacher Sun to go ahead, because he would figure it out himself. After obtaining consent to this, Wudafa enveloped his fist with a golden aura, and then attacked the dragon, hitting and driving it into the floor of the dormitory. Teacher Sun stood behind the headmaster on a dragon that was bound by chains created by him. Wudafan drew attention to the teacher, and then approached him and the monster with a threatening look and said that he had not fought like this for a long time. Both were with a determined look. After that, the dragon was defeated. Chapter 8. A young man was sitting on the floor against the wall in the corridor and was shaking with fear. A monster was coming at him menacingly. The young man waved him away with a bat and told him not to approach him. and so the dragon raised his clawed paw and cut the young man's bat into pieces. The young man, shrinking, shouted and asked for help. The monster's muzzle was already close to him, but then something broke through the monster's head, and the young man continued to sit huddled. Then someone told him to get up because he was safe now. When the young man opened his eyes and saw in front of him Su Li, who was standing at the ready with a gun and a smiling losing, the young man called Su Li by name and said that he was also in the dorm, then thanked him. Su Li was surprised that the young man knew him. The young man replied to him that he had given a speech at last year's admission ceremony, and had always been a role model. The young man was very happy at the time of the speech. Su Li agreed with him and asked why he was still in the dorm, because before that, there was a warning about moving to a safer place. The young man replied that he overslept, and when he wanted to leave the room, he suddenly ran into a monster already at the door of the room. Su Li smiled and told the young man to follow him and keep up. Lu Xing was also smiling after a while. Su Li, Lu Xing and the young men were sneaking down the stairs. Su Li stopped his travelers while carefully peeking around the corner. Then they were all amazed at the picture that appeared in front of them around the corner. It was a blue-colored portal. The portal led to a world where there were other dragons, like the ones they had met earlier. Su Li came out ahead of the guys and said that he would go first if he didn't come back, then let them run away. They didn't need to wait for him. His gaze at that moment was serious and resolute before he left. Su Li handed the gun to Lu Xing and told her to take it if they were in a dangerous situation, then let her use it. The girl accepted the gun and told Su Li to take care of herself entering the portal. Su Li thought that he needed to be more careful. The dragon slept for a long time, and then suddenly woke up. Su Li, already standing at the portal, looked at the sleeping dragons and thought that the portal was most likely the main reason for the appearance of dragons in the dormitory. The young man suggested that if the portal was destroyed, everything would return to its former course, but then a dragon's muzzle appeared from behind the portal, and then the monster attacked Su Li with its paw. The young man jumped away from where he was, and the dragon's paw landed there. This dragon was different from those that had previously appeared from the portal. He was several times bigger than those dragons. His body was covered with black scales with patches of yellow and orange. The dragon was surrounded by a black and red or losing, and the young man, shaking behind her, looked at Su Li and the dragon in a frightened way. Su Li himself stopped at the portal at that moment. He looked at it and the dragon sleeping behind it, and realized that the portal was not transmitting sounds. Therefore he had to make decisions. Otherwise the monsters might wake up. Su Li clenched his hand into a fist and embraced him with energy. After that, he went on the attack and slammed his fist into the dragon's face. But this attack had no effect. Su Li was surprised by this, and thought about the reason why his power evaporated exactly the moment he touched it. The dragon threw Su Li away with his paw. Lu Xing covered her mouth with one hand and thought about what the young man should do, because he is not a rival to the dragon. Meanwhile, Su Li was recovering. The dragon threw him so hard into the wall that it cracked in the place where he landed. At this moment, Lu Xing was thinking that she needed to calm down, because Su Li is in danger, and she is the only one who can help him. Su Li thought that the monster was different from the previous ones. The outer shell could not be penetrated by its own strength. His usual attack wouldn't change anything. He knew that himself. But then Lu Xing fired several shots at the dragon, which covered itself from them with a paw. The bullets did not bring any harm to the dragon, but on the contrary, only angered him. The monster looked at the girl with a ferocious look. She couldn't understand why her attacks didn't work. Su Li shouted at the girl to run away. The dragon was already coming at her, and Lu Xing tried to shoot back at him and told him not to approach. Su Li grabbed the dragon's hind leg with both hands. At that moment, the dragon was trying to eat the girl, and when his jaw did not close on her, he was surprised. The monster turned around and saw Su Li, who was holding his paw, declaring himself energy. The young man reminded the dragon that he was his opponent, so let him not dare to be distracted from him. His gaze burned with determination and energy. After that, he said that he would take the dragon home. After that, he spun the monster around and threw it into the portal. This woke up the other dragons and did not understand what had happened. After this hitch, the dragons rushed into the portal. Su Li embraced his right fist with energy and said that it was better for the monsters to be on the other side of the portal. After that, the young man flew into the portal. After this attack of his, the portal began to tighten. Already in the almost missing portal, Su Li said goodbye to the monsters with a smile and said that he hoped about the absence of their meeting in the future. Here, the portal finally closed, and the black dragon finally tried to attack the young man with his paw. The monster was not happy with this, so the sky of the place where they were burst out with his roar. Chapter 9. The sports ground of the Qian school. Liang Yangwei was walking on the roof of the playground. He put some kind of small installation at one of the pillars. At the same time, he thought that soon everyone would know the true power. But then a voice came from behind him. This person asked Liang Yangwei about which course he was from. After that, he turned around and saw two similar young men in front of him. One of them had a monocle on his eye. His name is Qing Feng. The other was standing with a tablet in his hands. His name is Cheng Lu. Both of them are teachers. Ching Feng said that all the students had to evacuate and clarified that Liang Yang, we had not been notified about this, and that he had forgotten in that place. Liang Yang, we looked angrily at the teachers and said that it was bothering him, because he wasn't going to be particularly stressed, but apparently there was nothing left for him. At that moment, the teachers noticed the tattoo on Liang Yang Hui's neck. Ching Feng said that Liang Yang Hui was from the Yermangent order, so they need to notify others. Cheng Lu put his hand in his pants pocket, but then Lang Yang Wei attack flew between them. His hands and himself were surrounded by black, red energy. He smiled angrily and said that they should not hope for help, because none of the teachers of the school are capable of anything. Liang Yang, we halted the dark flame using a high-speed punch. Uses spiritual force to distort space and produce vibration. Liang Yang, we said that, in his opinion, two insignificant people were very unlucky at the same time he went on the attack. The teacher's hands were embraced by blue-colored energy, and then they almost touched the palms, which were more and more surrounded by energy. Then they put their hands forward to attack, forming a sphere. Yang Yang was struck by the fact of joint cultivation. Joint cultivation is a type of cultivation in which the forces of two or more people are combined to produce a powerful attack. The energy of the teachers and Liang Yang collided, becoming a single ball, one half of which was red with black flecks, and the other half was blue. The wind rose around her. Liang Yang flew away due to this attack, sliding on the floor. He thought that the previous technique had consumed too much of his energy, and the dark flame was also expending a decent amount of energy. There was not much energy left. While the dust was settling, the teachers went on the attack, intending to attack Liang Yang from the air. Liang Yang managed to jump away from the attack, and one of the teachers landed on the place where he was standing, breaking the floor. At that moment, Cheng Lu jumped out from behind Ching Feng. Cheng Lu attacked with a leg that was covered with energy. With a Liang Yang turn, he managed to put out his hands in a defensive gesture. Meanwhile, Ching Feng went on the attack again. He leaned to arm on Cheng Lu's shoulder and jumped, attacking with his foot. Liang Yang was surprised by this attack, but nevertheless managed to dodge. And again, Cheng Lu went on the attack, who raised his fist to strike and embraced him with energy. Liang Yang realized that he couldn't dodge when the fist had almost reached Liang Yang, but then a man appeared in a golden glow between him and the teachers, which surprised them. This man was Ao Ma. Cheng Feng said in surprise about the appearance of another enemy. To this, Cheng Lu said that what he was afraid of, you just need to kill the enemy. At the same time, he prepared his fist for a blow in which he concentrated energy. Alma snorted at this, and then raised his arm above his head to strike, covering it with energy. After that, he attacked Cheng Lu, cutting him in two. Cheng Feng called his name and reached out with his hand. After that, he jumped up, concentrated the energy in his fist to attack and said that he was his opponent. Ao Ma said that he was looking for death, after which he kicked him in the stomach. Cheng Feng coughed up blood and then was thrown away. Liang Yang was surprised by the appearance of Commander Ao Ma. The dome around the Qian school dormitory began to disappear. Su Li was lying on the floor and said that finally, everything was back on track. Losing and the young men he had saved were sitting on the floor next to him. The strange spiritual force disappeared. A message came to the director's phone in which it was written about his payment arrears, so he was asked to pay it on time. He told Teacher Sun out loud that the signal had been restored. The director at DAFA thought that they had been locked up in the dorm for too long, so he wouldn't even know how far Yermingen had progressed in their plans. So they needed to gather all the teachers as soon as possible. Director, leaving the scene of the battle, I told Teacher Sun Hueta to inform all the teachers, so that they would immediately head to the tower. The teacher followed him behind them, and one of the ruined walls there was a defeated dragon. Meanwhile, the Qian school's energy collection tower. Some teachers were in the air near this tower. They were floating on their swords. One of the teachers, a woman with short black hair and red eyes, Special Teacher Lu Cheng, made a suggestion. She said that everyone had already received a message from the director, which spoke about the importance of guarding the energy collection tower. The blonde man, Teacher Yuan Jin, said that he understood everything, so they can't let the members of the Ermingen get in. Lu Cheng turned to Teacher Chen and asked if she had contacted other teachers. The woman, who was Chen Ing, his teacher, who had brown hair and blue eyes, replied that Teacher Sun and the director were patrolling together, and communication with the other two was lost. At that moment, Alma grabbed Liang Yang by the neck and said that the two at the stage of laying the foundations almost overpowered him. It's a shame for a member of Ermingand Yang. We said he would explain everything. He began to explain breathlessly that a student at the chi purification level had killed Wang He and magics. If not for that, he would have been able to complete this mission long ago. Alma told him that one person at the level of chi purification killed Wang He and Magic Sang-I, who were at the stage of laying the foundations, and clarified that he should believe it. Liang Yang was already gasping for breath. Grabbing the commander's hand, he asked Daoma to give him another chance. Liang Yang said that everything is almost finished, because only the energy collection tower remains. At the same time, he raised his hand with the communicator in it. The commander said that he was still useful, grabbed the communicator and released Liang Yang Wei. Alma opening the hologram from the communicator, saying that he was leaving the tower on Liang Yang Wei so he could make amends. Liang Yang Hui was trying to catch his breath. Alma grinned and put his hand on Tom's shoulder, and then said that even if he died, he still had to plant the last bomb. Only in this case, the task of Ermenken would be completed. Commander Aoma's face at this moment was terrifying and full of rage. Liang Yang Hui was terrified to the point of shaking, and in a stuttering voice, replied that he understood everything. Alma wrapped his hand in energy and put it on his shoulder.